2.5 months almost into the program, and you've been one of the most impressive people that I've met.
I get a phone call, like, you've been accepted and we're so happy to offer you. I said, I don't believe you. And she's like, let me send you an email from my Stanford email account so you think it's real. And I actually was not thinking about coming to Stanford. I was actually pretty close-minded, and I said I was going to go to Harvard. One of the kids in my class coming up to me and telling me, hey, I can't play with you anymore. My dad says you're different.
Wow.
That's probably one of the first times I thought about and internalized the fact that maybe I'm not like these other kids.
You were born in Karachi, yeah?
Yeah.
Will you ever go back to Karachi? Muneeb Ata, welcome to MBA Odyssey.
Thank you so much.
It's great to have you. We are 2.5 months almost into the program, and you've been one of the most impressive people that I've met, and I'm really happy to have you here.
Well, thank you. Likewise. So I'm excited to dig in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tell me, the reason we call it MBA Odyssey, because I think everyone here has had their own Odyssey, the journey they started, and they are now somewhere in the middle of it, and hopefully they'll just continue it after here at Stanford. But tell me, where did yours start?
This is very interesting, I think, when we talk about like where things begin, because I was born in Karachi, Pakistan. I don't remember it much at all because I moved to the United States when I was 3. But I don't know, like, okay, I should have thought about this question a lot more because that's usually how it begins, right? A very interesting, I would say, like, family dynamic where my father, like a lot of families in Pakistan, if you're born into like a family, you live with your father's extended family in a way, his immediate family. And so I grew up with a lot of cousins in an early childhood, and my uncle had moved to the United States before us. And so when I was 3 years old, I moved to the US. We actually moved 3 months after 9/11.
Jesus.
And so my name is actually Mohammad Ata, as is the name of my father and my uncle and all of my uncles and all of my cousins as well. And so my dad tells this story. I moved in December 2001, and my father was already here. And they actually my uncle and my father got visited by the FBI, just out of a sort of like, who are you guys? What is any relation?
A warm welcome, let's say.
A warm welcome. Yeah, absolutely. And so I think from the moment I arrived in the United States, my dad and my parents sort of had this idea that, okay, his upbringing is going to be very different than ours because he's going to be immediately seen as an outsider rather than us, where they had been in a pretty homogenous society in Pakistan. Yeah.
So you end up going to primary school, middle school, high school, all in the US.
Yeah.
But speaking of this being a different upbringing compared to the people around you, could you give us a little bit of insight into where were you settled, what part of the country it was, and what was the environment, what kind of societies you guys were dealing with, and then how was it early years of school, if you had any kind of maybe dissonance or any sort of difficulty going through those years?
Yeah. Okay. I think it's better to start maybe then with a contrast, right? Pakistan's founded in 1947. All of my great-grandparents moved from Punjab in India to Punjab in Pakistan. And my parents, both of my parents, come from essentially the same tribe of Punjabis. They're Arai. And so they grew up in a very homogenous society. When they got a little bit older, their parents moved to Karachi, which is a city of about 25 million people. And so they were always in environments that were, cosmopolitan, but pretty homogenous as well. There was this idea that a Pakistani identity was forming. There was this concept of like economic growth, decline, democracy, dictatorship, not a lot of stability, but always size, magnitude, and this familiarity of culture. When we moved to the United States, when I was 3, we moved to a small town in northern Alabama, about 10,000 people. So if you've ever read or heard of the town of To Kill a Mockingbird, very famous American novel,
of course,
the town I grew up in is actually, like, the book is based on that town. A real Supreme Court case that essentially 9 Black boys were accused of a crime they did not commit. And it's called the Scottsboro Boys Trial, which actually led to a lot of legislation in the United States, was the groundwork of the civil rights movement. And so the dynamics of that town, not dissimilar to what they were in like the 1920s when this happened. It was a predominantly white town. like much of the United States South, Confederate flags, which are usually a symbol of maybe
olden days.
Yeah. Maybe a bit of an aspiration, a heritage of the past that it may have some racial implications. It's quite common growing up. I thought that the Confederate flag was the American flag because it was more common than the American flag. And so I grew up in an environment where, like, for the most part, as a kid, you don't pick up on these things. And for the most part, your fellow students don't really say anything to you. For them, everything is normal. People are different colored. All these things happen. But I remember when I was about 7 years old, I have a very salient memory of one of the kids in my class coming up to me and telling me, I can't play with you anymore. My dad says you're different.
Wow.
And I think that's probably one of the first times I thought about and internalized the fact that maybe I'm not like these other kids. As you may have guessed, there's not a lot of Pakistanis in Scottsboro.
Surely not.
The reason why my family ended up there is my uncle had moved to the United States. He had become a doctor, and as part of like a residency, like shortening program, what a lot of states will do is they'll incentivize people to move there. And Alabama's big movement was, if you're a physician, we will, like, essentially you don't have to do a certain number of residency year requirements if you practice rural healthcare. And he started that program, fell in love with the area, and stayed. And when we followed, and
I can imagine. How long were you guys in Alabama for?
8 years.
8 years.
8 years. And I will say Northern Alabama is actually gorgeous.
I can imagine.
if you like, I kind of joke that my dad, having come from like Karachi, which is like very busy, very bustling, dust everywhere in a lot of ways, and he come to Northern Alabama, he would almost always describe it as like, I imagine like heaven is like this. Jeez. It's very idyllic. The town slogan's like, where the mountains meet the lakes. And so it's just like the best fishing in the world is there. They do hold like the Bass Classic there. It's like a very big thing.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And then what happened? Did you guys move around afterwards?
No, so we settled in Scottsboro for 8 years. My dad actually, it was very hard for him to find a job. He had gone to school in a non-traditional manner. He'd become an engineer, but like many immigrants in the United States, it's quite difficult to transition and find that same path here. Just because of, sometimes there's not opportunity. Sometimes there is opportunity and you're overlooked because you don't speak the language very well. And so my dad actually worked at a grocery store. And so I grew up in a duplex about like maybe a mile or two from my school. And my mom and me, we would walk to school every day. And I have two older sisters, and the bus would come pick them up. And my dad would essentially be working odd jobs. He'd be going and working at the grocery store or doing stuff at one of my uncle's clinics. And then he applied, just randomly had a friend in Oklahoma, and applied and got accepted and became an electrical engineer in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Sight unseen, we'd never even heard of Oklahoma. And when I was 8, packed our bags and we moved to Tulsa.
And that has been home for you ever since?
Ever since.
So tell me a little bit about the college years. Like how did that work? Yeah. Like which college did you go to? What did you start to study?
College was interesting. Growing up in Tulsa, I will say like the motto, essentially, if you're a person with ambition, if you're a person that wanted to do anything on a big scale or wanted to make an impact, your first thought was, I'm going to leave Tulsa. Like as growing up, like every single one of my friends that wanted to do something with their lives would be like, I'm getting out of this town. And so my first thought applying to colleges was, I'm going to get as far away from this place as I possibly can. And that meant like leaving Oklahoma. And so I applied to like 18 schools, had no idea what I was doing. My sisters had gone to college before me, but we were the first generation to understand. Got into my dream school and then got into a slate of other schools and realized tuition was a thing. And I was like, I cannot afford to go anywhere except the University of Oklahoma.
What was the dream school?
UChicago.
So you got into University of Chicago.
Yeah.
That's the university you wanted to go to.
Yeah.
As far almost as you can get from.
I mean, you're in the same time zone, but you're like,
yeah.
I told myself, so I grew up in my cousins and my siblings and everyone in my family. I think by virtue of being like a first generation immigrant family, they impress upon you, you can do, you can join one of 3 industries. You can become a doctor, which is preferred, or an engineer. And if you really screw up, they might let you go to law school, right? And so the hope was if I go to UChicago, I might get to go to law school because it's a good program for the humanities, it's a good program for literature. But if I went to the University of Oklahoma, which I got an amazing scholarship to, I would do what my sister did and become a dentist. And so I enrolled at the University of Oklahoma, and with a biology degree and full intentions to go to dental school.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what happened?
I mean, the first thing that happened.
You're not a dentist. You're not a dentist.
I'm not a
That's
dentist,
as far as I know.
Yeah. I'm not a dentist. Thankfully, pulling teeth is like pulling teeth to me. I mean, it was just like I hated the entire environment. But what my sister had told me was dentists get a lot of free time, so just do this now, and then you can do whatever you want in the future. Which is actually not true, but something that you tell a kid definitely to go down that path. What happened was I was really involved in debate and policy and sort of understanding how the world around me worked when I was in high school. And I think growing up the way I grew up, in the place that I grew up, you are the only brown kid in your class. You're the only Muslim many people have ever met. You carry with you this idea of you're always an ambassador for something. My parents were always worried, I think, for my sisters and me, because they didn't want us to ever feel like, I don't know, that they knew that we would feel that we were different, but they never wanted us to be on anybody's radar.
Yeah.
Like, keep your head down. It's very, I think, Asian American mentality of, and I don't blame it, like keep your head down, like they call it the model minority here. Like, you don't voice your opinions, you do the work, you're very smart, you kind of just move along. And it is a myth in a lot of ways because it stereotypes you. But that was my parents' hope for me. So even when I did debate tournaments, my mom would tell me, she's like, don't go too hard. Like, if you have an opinion and the other person not listening to you, agree with them. Don't try to debate them.
Man, they tell me that every day, even now.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, like, be careful, don't.
Yeah.
And so 3 months into being at the University of Oklahoma, the 2016 election happened. Oklahoma is the most conservative state in the country, alongside, I would say, West Virginia. But every county in Oklahoma went red. Every county in Oklahoma has gone red for every election that Donald Trump has run in. And I think being 18 years old, sort of starry-eyed, I could not come to the terms with the fact that people that I loved, people that I cared about, my community, would vote this way. I didn't want to buy it, even though it was true. And I wanted to make change in that regard. And so I picked up a degree. There's a degree program at the University of Oklahoma, which is like quite good. It's called Letters. It's like history, literature, philosophy, all bundled into one.
That's a very interesting name.
Yeah, it comes from this term, I think, of like, like he was a man of letters, like a well-read individual.
Yes.
And so I decided to pick it up as my second degree. So I was studying biology and letters, which I think gives me the same education as like most 1800s like Englishmen. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're doing a natural science, and then and so they had a really good constitutional studies department, and I was very intrigued from the beginning of. I didn't tell my parents. I kind of hid it. My sisters knew, but it was always this thing of like, I'm just testing it out, And at the time, I was supposed to be looking for internships in, like, you shadow a dentist, or maybe you do something in healthcare, or maybe. And one of my friends actually pitched to me. She was like, "You should go work for the mayor of Tulsa because they've elected a new mayor. They're really thinking about changing. He seems more progressive, and
you could use a dental hygiene routine.
Exactly. Maybe you could do something like." And basically, what I told myself was like, the dentistry thing. All I need is my shadowing hours at some point. It doesn't have to be the first summer. And so, I jumped at the opportunity. Called them. I mean, I applied. They wanted junior or senior. Told them I was a junior by hours. And I was, and applied, got the job. And I don't know if you've ever been in the situation where like you've wanted a thing, but you didn't think you'd get it. And so you were like, it is what it is. But when you get it, now you actually have to move on it. Now it's like real. Now like the dream has been achieved.
That was my MBA admission.
Exactly. Now you have to go through with it. Yeah. Now you have to pay tuition. Now you have to go to class. Now you have to
move a continent.
Move a continent. Yeah. And so when you get that yes, it's, I think, very exciting for the first minute. And then the reality of like, oh, I'm going to have to like tell people I'm going to have to plan this out. I'm going to have to do all these things started to set in. And so, I like first time ever in my life. And the other part was having to go back to Tulsa. right?
Yes.
I told her, I was like, I'm never going back to this town. I'm done with it. And going back, not only like going to Tulsa, but like working in downtown Tulsa in the mayor's office, pro Tulsa, for the first time in my life.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And so I go in and I'm like, it's my first day ever alone downtown, suit and tie, meet the mayor. And I was like 19 years old. And so one thing that like the more experienced people would know, what you would know, what I would know now is when you meet like a leader of like an organization and they're meeting with you and you're the most junior member of the organization and they say something to you like, and if you have any ideas, let me know. It's formality. It is something that somebody says in like a, but yeah, no,
You had a lot of ideas.
The next day I showed up with 3 ideas. And to his credit, he was like, I think like, you know, he heard all of them and he was like, I think this one has legs. Here are like 3 people you should talk to. Tell them I sent you. Let's see what happens.
That's fantastic.
And so that summer I was like running around with a badge of honor from my mayor saying, hey, like, I think this could work and pitching it to like the police department, the fire department, the EMSA chief, and working on this initiative where I was like, we could reduce essentially like non-emergency. A lot of people that don't have emergency call emergency numbers.
Yeah.
And I was like, we're wasting so many resources. We're wasting so much time. People might get hurt. These people might be like, these crews might be on the other side of town. How can we reduce the rate of non-emergency phone calls to emergency phone numbers and worked on an initiative with them that we launched that summer. And it was so much fun. It was way more fun than shadowing a dentist, which I also did on the side. It was way more fun than taking chemistry classes during the summer, which I also had done that summer. And it was also Ramadan that summer. It was like during the summer. So I was waking up at like 4 a.m., eating, and then going back to sleep, going to the mayor's office, and then trading off like Tuesdays, Thursdays, I would have half days where I'd wake up super early in the morning to be in chemistry classes for like 5 hours a day, and then going to the mayor's office. And then like the entire summer just evolved that way.
That's fantastic.
And I had so much fun. And it was like one of those hits where you kind of tell yourself like, okay, I did it once. And my sisters were like, you did it once. Time to focus on dental school.
Yeah.
And so I went back to school with the idea of like, okay, time to focus again on dental school.
Focusing on the dental school after that fantastic experience that you had was not possible.
Yeah.
So I want to just interject here and ask you a very contested question, probably the most important question of this whole interview.
Yeah.
Are dentists doctors?
Oh, man. My sister might listen to this.
I hope she does.
I hope she does. And she is a DMD. So I will say, yeah, they are. You know, the first 2 years, you actually have to go through dental. You have to actually do the whole body. You know, the first 2 years is a lot like medicine, and then you go into your own little surgical like areas.
But then you did decide not to become one. Yeah,
I did decide not to become one, mostly because I don't like mouths. I think I would have been a terrible dentist. I'm really good at the soft skills. You know what? Like you go to the dentist.
Yeah,
they're like, "How are you doing?" They're very
talkative. You exactly.
They're very talkative. And that's the part that I probably was very good at is like the other person can't respond to you. You just tell them whatever you want, you know, like they're like, how was your weekend? You're like, blah, 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 and it's in your mouth. And they just like, well, I did this weekend and I had this kind of like, and I think I could do very well in like one-sided conversation.
Yes.
You know? Yeah.
I can imagine that.
Yeah.
So you end up not doing dentistry and then you finished the degree of leathers, or so what was it? What was the degree that you got? Like, was it like a Bachelor of Arts or?
Yeah. I mean, so very interestingly, not to go back, but what happened is I just had a series of very cool internships every summer. Every year I'd go back to school and I would say, I'm going to focus on dentistry, and every summer I would end up back in Tulsa somehow. It'd be like that next summer I worked on this park. There's this like giant, it was the largest gift to a public park in US history. It was like a $500 million park that I got to be on like the ground floor of launching. Then summer after that, it was this remote worker incentive. Summer after that, it was just summer after summer going through the motions of I'm going to go to dental school and then ending up back in Tulsa working on economic development or philanthropy or some sort of initiative that was more policy and private related. And so I ended up graduating with a degree in biology. So I got my Bachelor of Science in biology, and I also got a Bachelor of Arts in letters. And then so the letters degree is very choose your own adventure, much like Stanford is here. And so you were supposed to graduate with, like, if you graduate with honors, you graduate with thesis, a research paper. I did my research in economics, labor mobility, and then I wrote my thesis in constitutional law.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
And did that then lead to a job in that in that sector as well? Like, how did you go about like finding your job?
Yeah. So I actually, it was the internships. So after I worked at the mayor's office, there was one philanthropy in Tulsa. It's called the George Kaiser Family Foundation. It's a $4 billion fund. It's, I think, one of the largest in the country per capita. We serve only the city, and all that money is dedicated to the people of the city, essentially, and programs related to making Tulsa a better place. And so I worked with them to launch the park, and then I went back and I worked with them to do a lot of work around like labor mobility, like solving brain drain, which is the ex-migration of bachelor degree holders from our state. How do you retain people? How do you recruit people? And I went back like during the school year, my senior year, to help them launch like a VC fund, to help them better understand talent recruitment in terms of like companies that they wanted to recruit. And so, I mean, I wish there was like a solid process, but really, I just happened to hit it off with these people who like I loved spending my time with. And my senior year, COVID hit, and I was thinking about taking a gap year before I applied to dental school, as you can imagine, because I was very geared towards dental school. And one of my professors had told me, Muneeb, like, make a sample job description of dream job and try to find out like what areas you would make the most sense to be at. And so I made this like job description, was trying to find companies, and the philanthropy reached out and they were like, hey, what are you up to? I was like, I'm looking for a job. And they're like, oh, like, send us your job description. Let's see if there's anything similar. We'll send it around to folks. The next day, they just sent me a link, and it was to their job board, and they'd copied and pasted my job description and put it on their job board. It was really cute, and I applied, and I started working for them. Like,
how long did you work for that?
4 years. 4 years. I told them that I wanted the summer off. Like, after graduation, I just needed some time. And literally finals week, I was like going to like my organic chemistry 2 final, and they called me. They're like, hey, Elon Musk is thinking about moving to Tulsa. You'd be helping us like run communications with him and his team. Do you want to just start on Monday? And I was like, no, I need the summer off. And then I called them back after 15 minutes, and I was like, when can we get started? And they were like, we already put you on payroll, so like we figured you'd say yes. And so I started the Monday after graduation, and I worked with them. I started, I guess that's May 2020, and I left April 2024.
So that has been your last job before MBA as well.
And really, if you think about it, my only job my entire life, because even my internships, aside from the mayor's office, was with them.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Let's maybe use that as a segue and talk a little bit about the MBA.
Yeah.
What clicked? What made you think about it?
Yeah.
We all know that you have told your mom that you'll at some point go back to the dental school.
Yeah.
We know that.
Yeah.
But this break that you're taking at Stanford Graduate School of Business, how did that come about? Like, what happened? How did you make that decision?
Yeah.
When did you feel the need for such a thing? Especially because I think in your environment and from your background, it's not something super typical. Yeah. Tell me about that a little bit more.
I actually I don't think I'd ever known anybody that gotten their MBA, aside from like an uncle who had lived in Canada who had an MBA and worked for the city. And so I was working at the philanthropy, and I'd essentially come out to my parents as a non-dentist. You know, I was like, it just can't do it. And we'd settled, and we'd agreed that I'd go to law school. And so I was workshopping, like thinking about law schools, and one of the programs I helped make at the philanthropy I worked at is a remote worker incentive program. And so we were basically paying people to relocate to our town, and it became pretty successful when COVID hit. We started in 2018, and COVID hit, and a lot of people were living in their homes and wanting to move to places where they could have a bigger space, they could have a backyard, they could be more in the outdoors. And that caught the attention of a Harvard Business School professor. And so I ended up helping co-write like a case at Harvard Business School and getting exposure to this world of business, which I didn't know existed. Like, I didn't know that business school students thought about things outside of like banking or consulting.
Yes.
And like immediately I was like, no, I'd rather go here. rather than the law school routes. Because
I remember you telling me that you also then ended up hosting some of those students.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So because it was COVID and we'd established a relationship with Harvard, Harvard does this program called Field where they send their students at the end of their first year, essentially like internationally, to do work with companies and organizations in different countries across the globe. Because of COVID, they couldn't travel, so they decided to host it domestically. And they chose Tulsa as one of the sites. And so we ended up having, I think, like 60 Harvard MBA ones come to Tulsa. And I individually led a team of them at one of the programs I led. But we helped them find source sites all across town. And it was just such an incredible experience. I think that was to see someone go from not knowing anything about what you're working on, like in the beginning of a semester, and then working with you all semester and coming for like a week and being like, oh, this is exactly what you're thinking. These are problems we've identified. These are solutions we've identified. Super helpful for free for these organizations. And then just the exposure to interesting people from interesting backgrounds. Definitely felt like a community I would want to join.
And that was the reason that you almost thought about that. Which year was this?
I think this was 2021 when they came. Yeah.
And you almost didn't had your eyes on the ball since then, yeah?
Yeah. It was something that I always thought about. This needs to be my next thing. I would like to, because I think one of the things that I think we get stuck on is you've done something, and when you begin it, like when you are a college student that's just graduated into a job, you're in this learning mode, and you're picking up everything, and you feel like I know nothing, and I'm learning all these things, and I'm trial by error, and then you reach the point where you start to feel like you understand things, and then you get inevitably hit by the second wave of like I know what I don't know. Yeah. And immediately I saw the value of what a business degree could be. It's exposure to these financial institutions, but also to operations, to this essentially a betterment of organizations and betterment of myself, betterment of leadership, and understanding the world probably in a more holistic manner than I thought maybe a law degree could do for me.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
But for those in the audience that are now thinking about, okay, what is the right timing to go ahead and submit an application for an MBA program, to a business school and whatnot. You came across Harvard at 2021, a very maybe close proximity, and then you almost had a good shot at it probably even then because you knew quite a few people.
Yeah.
But then you waited a few years, maybe a couple of years until you submitted your application. Why did that happen? Did you just feel like you don't have enough work experience, or was it that you just weren't ready? Like, how did you go about thinking about that?
I think there was a myriad of things, and I think for everybody it's probably a bit different. For me, I was doing very interesting things at work, and my environment was like, I love the people I work with. I want to be here for longer. And so that was one consideration, was like, I've just not been here long enough to be considering leaving. But I think the second part is it's about what you bring to the classroom. Every one of these kids that I had met had been out of, like, very few of them were like recent college grads, if any. But a lot of them had been in the workforce 4 to 7 to 8 years.
Yes.
And they came with so many rich experiences from their past that were not only beneficial for them as they were going through the program, but I think at a stage where they were helping their classmates better test hypotheses for things that they might want to do, or subjects they might be interested in. And so I definitely thought of it as like, okay, I could go now and learn a lot, but I could wait and I could think about more things that I'm interested in exploring and be a better contributor to my community once I get there. Yeah.
That's great advice. Then the time comes, you think about applying to business schools. How many did you choose? Why did you choose them? Like, how was the process for you?
Yeah. So I talked to like everybody that I possibly could get my hands on, in terms of like, I'd met them, I'd seen their work, people I admired, people I wanted to be more like, and interviewed. Basically just like 30-minute coffee chats of like, okay, tell me about your life. Tell me how you got here. What are the things that you're hoping to learn? What are the things that you're interested in? Why this program?
And these were either current students or alumni?
Current students, alumni, friends as SOs, like people that had graduated 30 years ago. Like, I mean, it's everybody from all different universities and all different programs. and trying to better understand, okay, this program is like this program is like that, because I think a lot of people just see, okay, these are the top 10 programs, like put on a blindfold, throw a dart, they're all going to be the same, but they actually have very different feels to them, and very different communities, very different environments, even though the outcomes might suggest a very similar trajectory.
Yes.
And so talk to a lot of folks. I think that was the first step of like, okay, is it actually a good fit? Second was better understanding, well, what is it that I want to accomplish, and what are organizations or places that want, like, what are schools that would value that, and what are places that could be beneficial. I think one of the resources that's very underutilized is this organization called the consortium.
Yes.
And so if you are a student that's from an underrepresented background, if you're Black, if you are Hispanic, if you're Indigenous, like they want to increase representation in the workforce and in leadership in for those demographics, as they should. And then also people that work to uplift those populations and work in impact, they also encourage to apply. And so I applied through the consortium because I wanted to be a part of that community. And there was a lot of benefit for me applying through the consortium. One, absolutely the network, the people that I felt like very similar to and very tied to in terms of the things we wanted to accomplish. But also it streamlined the application process for me. I essentially had to apply once through this form, and then had supplementary essays for different schools. Harvard was the only school that I applied to that was not part of the consortium. So I applied for that sort of on its own. But that was very helpful for me.
So which schools did you end up selecting?
I ended up applying to Stanford, Harvard, Dartmouth, and Yale. Yeah.
But not your dream school, University of Chicago.
I ended up not. The thing is, I think I would have gone to U Chicago. I would have applied to U Chicago had it been like an MFA program or like a law program.
But not Booth.
Not Booth. Booth is a great school.
It is.
For me, I was like, I really valued, Yale has a really good like social entrepreneurship, social like impact focus. Dartmouth has like an amazing community. Like Tuck has like a very tight knit community. Harvard, I had an amazing experience there, and I was really into like this case method and better understanding like I think your classmates come from like a very like global lens, and they're usually like people that have strived to make impact in whatever capacity they are, but they do things on big scales. And Stanford actually was like a last minute, like, that seems cool. Like it was never something fully formed in my mind. I knew a little about it. I'd met like a handful of people from there, but never anybody. And when I was applying, one of my friends had told me, he's like, oh, like Harvard, you might have a good shot at because of your experiences there, but like Stanford's a crapshoot. Like don't even apply there. Like it's a waste of money.
But this process that you went through in terms of exploring different schools, understanding what you bring to the table, but also understanding what they could offer you is very refreshing.
Yeah.
Exactly as you said, not going by the list of ranking and then choosing the top 5, top 10 and just shooting your shot at them. I think it's very thoughtful. And that's why the 4 schools that you have selected are not typically the 4 schools that people would have selected. Yeah. Not seen many people that have selected Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and Tuck. It's not the mix that you would expect. But then you figured out that those are the ones that could offer you what you want afterwards. So tell us how was your admission rate?
Yeah.
Like, what happened?
Yeah. They all have different ways of operating in a way, even though the process is supposed to be the same. It's very interesting. I applied to Harvard, got an interview, did my interview. Very tight, sort of 30 minutes. They make it pretty clinical. I had a decent experience. I know some people have sort of like it is very stressful. And then I essentially like booked a trip to New Zealand with my friends. I was like, going to New Zealand. I had no idea when the other interviews were going to happen, but I was like, I think this week is safe. And then the Thursday before my flight, I got an email from Tuck. Like, hey, we'd love to interview you. I was like, cool. This sounds awesome. Got an email from Yale. We'd love to interview you. Fantastic. The interview has to happen next week when you're in New Zealand. And I was like, whoa. Like, I don't feel like what am I going to do? And so I emailed Tuck and I was like, hey, is there any way we can push this back a week? And they said, no, this is the only time we can interview you. Essentially, like, pack your suit and like, we'll see you there. Emailed Yale. Yale was like, when can you interview? I was like, I get back that Monday. They're like, well, that Monday is when you're getting interviewed. Didn't hear back from Stanford. I was like, okay, cool. Woke up at like 4 a.m. to do an interview at 5 a.m. in New Zealand for Tuck.
Jeez.
Suit and tie in Auckland. Like my friends are we're in an Airbnb. My friends are sleeping in the other room. I'm like in quiet voices being like, I'd love to go to Tuck, you know? And then like 2 days later, we're on this beach. Like we're going to Rotorua, which is like, I think is a very scenic, in the North Island. There's a very scenic route that gets you there. I'm on this beach eating like day old biryani. As you do, you know, and there's like pelicans. It's very idyllic, very scenic. We're like wearing our shorts. We're trying to go in the water. And I get this email, and it's from Stanford, and it says, "Hey, we're so sorry for disturbing you, but you never responded to our interview request. We think it may have gone to spam. If you're still interested in coming to this school, we'd love to interview you." And I was like, "Oh my, it's Stanford." In my spam folder, and I like looked through my spam folder, and I got an interview from Stanford, and I would have completely missed it had they not followed up.
Wow!
And I was like, thank you so much for emailing me. Like, I absolutely will get that scheduled as soon as possible. Like, I get back on Monday. Like, I'm happy to interview on Monday, and they responded with this sort of like, hey, like, will that give you enough time to adjust? Will you have jet lag? And I was like, this is so considerate. Like, when you're going through this process, you think of it a lot of like, oh, I need to get into this school. But Stanford, I think, was the only school that I interacted with that really valued like, oh no, like we want to make sure it works for you, through an application process, which should not have meant as much as it did to me. I was like, oh, like it was very accommodating, very relational.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah, and
so you interviewed with all 4 of the schools that you applied to.
Interviewed all 4,
and you got into all 4, or
so okay. There's like a week, right? There's a week where you hear back from everybody. Yes, and it's like the worst week.
Were you round 1 or round 2?
Round 1. So this is December.
Same.
Yeah. So you know how it is. You're like, you're like,
it's gonna determine my winter break.
Your winter break. Yeah. And you're kind of like, I've told people that like my boss has written my letter of recommendation. I basically told these people I'm gonna leave. You know, like, and it's so embarrassing if you're like gonna come back and be like, okay, so I'm sticking around. You know. And so I think it was like a Tuesday. On Tuesday, I was supposed to hear back, and it was systematically sort of place where I was supposed to hear back from Yale, and then I was supposed to hear back from Harvard, and then on Thursday, I was supposed to hear back from Dartmouth and Stanford, and it was like stressful. And the entire morning, Tuesday, if you get in, they usually call you.
Yeah.
And they told me like if you get in, expect a phone call from like 9 to 4. Like stressed the whole day. My boss had gone to Yale Law School, and so he had known that, very excited for me to hear back from Yale. I'm like, at like 3 o'clock, no call. Like, oh no. My boss is like, go home. Like, you're no use here anyway. I'm like, okay, great. I go home. 3:58, nothing. 3:59, nothing. 4 o'clock, get an auto email. We're so sorry. Like, you've been put on the wait list. I was like, man. Like if you think about like the admittance stats, Yale's supposed to be, your chances of getting to Yale are significantly higher than like a Harvard or a Stanford, just based off how the admissions go. And I was like, man, like stats are not looking good. My PRE score wasn't great, but I knew enough analysis to be able to make the decision of like, well, this is bad, probably a bad, trend,
Not a good start.
Not a good start. Because the next day I'm supposed to hear back from Harvard. Next day after that, Dartmouth, Stanford. So 4 o'clock, things are pretty down in the dumps. 4:01, I get a phone call. I'm like kind of processing through what I'm reading in front of me, and it's this number, and on my phone it says like like Palo Alto. Pick up. I cannot remember who it was from the admissions committee. I completely blank on that. But I pick up and they're like, is this me? Yes. Hi, I work at admissions at Stanford. I was so impressed. I couldn't wait to call you. I know you're supposed to hear from us officially on Thursday, but I just want to let you know that like you've been accepted and we're so happy to offer you. And so I said, I don't believe you. And I feel so bad. I was just like, I don't believe you. And she's like, let me send you an email from my Stanford email account so you think it's real. But man, that was such a sigh of relief. And I slept probably the best night of my life on that Tuesday night of like, hey, I got into Stanford. We're good. Nothing else matters. And then I got called by Harvard the next day. And my sleep was never the same after. Because then it was like a choice between Stanford and Harvard. I got a call from Dartmouth. They were also amazing. And but yeah, I got into 3 out of the 4. And then eventually Yale also accepted me. But I was like, we're good, you know? But it was insane. Yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah. Almost the same for me. I actually remember who called me from admissions. It was Will.
Okay.
And he has a lot of videos on YouTube.
Yeah. Will's so much fun. He's so happy.
Very iconic voice. Yeah. Very happy. A lot of energy. And I still remember when I picked up that phone and how it was. It was fantastic. Yeah. But let me know, like, how did you then go about making that decision? Like Harvard, Stanford,
Dartmouth. I talked to a friend from Dartmouth, and he was sort of he's the best. He's like, hey, like the Tuck community was awesome for me. If community is what you value, hands down, you go to Tuck. You don't really know what you're doing with your life. And I was like, fair. And he's like, and if you want to follow that a bit more, if you want to think about, things to explore, like Stanford and Harvard, very different experiences, but go with one of the two, if that's what you're looking for. And so, again, talk to everybody I could.
Yeah.
What are the differences? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses?
And I'm assuming you went to the admit weekends.
Went to admit weekends at both.
So for the audience that don't know what that is, once you get into the schools would invite you often to like a 2-day event on campus. They also have some virtual components to it. They receive you. You'd go through maybe a mock class, some speeches, some welcome, bunch of lunches and all that stuff. And then you get to know the school, get to see the school, get to see the community, and then make a decision and ideally choose them. Yeah. I didn't get to come to the admit weekend for visa purposes, obviously.
Yeah.
I did the virtual format of it, but I can imagine you went to both admit weekends.
I went to both. And I actually was not thinking about coming to Stanford's. I was actually pretty close-minded, and I said I was going to go to Harvard. And a few friends had pushed me go to the admit weekends. And so I came here. It's gorgeous. Like, fell in love with the campus immediately. There were pomegranates growing and like they were supposed to be like, I was like, this is great. It's January.
Yeah.
75 degrees. I was like, okay, this is gonna be hard to beat. There's also an energy here where everyone was like simultaneously the most fascinating person I'd ever met and also the kindest. It was like this weird mix of like, oh, you're so cool and you're also very considerate. And always thinking about innovation, always thinking about how can I make this better? I'm doing this thing now. I'm very interested in improving it for these people. I'm very focused on this industry right now, but I think this industry is doing it better. Like this sort of hardwired idea of like, I want to make things better and I want to be a part of change. Or I loved that spirit.
Yeah.
And then I went to Boston like 3 days later. It's like 30 degrees. Everything was a shade of gray. Like the clouds are gray, the cars are gray, very cold. The campus is giant. And it was this very professional, very traditional method of operating, and met amazing people there as well. Like really cool people that were doing just phenomenal things. But I really considered this idea of like, well, Muneeb, like you've never really done the traditional thing. And I always, I don't know, I have a gear towards being in like the chaotic sort of like anything can happen. And I think I knew what my experience would have been more or less like at Harvard.
Yes.
And I was very interested in like this, I want to try something new.
The alternative,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at that point, I don't think you can go wrong.
Yeah.
It does not matter.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, if it really does not matter, make a pros and cons list. You talk to like 1 million people. And I was like, I think I got to go to Stanford.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Let's just backtrack a little bit. And this is by no means an advice to people who want to apply necessarily, because every case is different, as we know.
Yeah.
But what do you think got you in? Like, and we know that there was a lot of components to the application. There are a bunch of essays you write. You have your GPA. You have your GRE or GMAT that you take. Your recommenders, the interview you have to go through. So it's a very holistic process.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to drill it down to like 2, 3, 4 things that you think like really were important or the differentiating factors of your application, what do you think those were? Like how did you managed to carve them out?
Yeah. I think by virtue of how business school works, you learn a lot from your classes, but you learn a lot also from your peers. And what I thought business schools were looking for, and what I thought I could bring to the table is a very unique perspective, as they're picking candidates, what they're really doing is filling up classes, right?
Yes.
And so they're like, how can this individual bring some sort of education to the person sitting next to them or their class or their section as a whole? And I really thought about what are the things that make me special that could allow me to contribute to someone else's education? What are things that I can bring to the table? So if I think about what got me in, specifically my GRE was nothing to write home about. My GPA was nothing to write home about. But
even though you had a letters degree.
Even though I had a letters degree,
yeah.
But I think storytelling was probably one element that got me in. This idea of having worked in the private world, also integrating with like public issues and social issues, and always this bent towards, look, I want to serve.
Yes.
And I think every school puts out, they're like, this is what we're looking for in a candidate. And I think, of course, like leadership and like a history of leadership, a potential for leadership is one thing. Like a baseline of, okay, you won't fail out of all of our classes is also probably a necessity. And I think the third thing is probably like, have you gone through something challenging? And how did you emerge on the other side of it? And so that's what I fixated on, of like, look, this is what I bring to the table that I think I could help my other classmates with.
You get into a school, you have a lot of coffee chats, you end up coming to the admit weekend, you do a bit of research on Stanford.
Yeah.
But it's all different when you arrive here.
Yeah.
When you start that week 0, when you go through the motions, when you're here. Did anything surprise you when you came here and started?
Yeah. That's a good question.
From what you had imagined it would be.
Yeah. I did not realize how hard the classes would be. I mean, like, it's just like I'd never taken any of these subjects before. So that was a surprise. Was like the rigor, I think, of the first quarter cannot be underestimated. And like anything that I could have maybe told you about, like, this is what I think business school people are like, went out the door. I definitely like came in with a lot of preconceived notions of like, well, this person may have done this sort of, thing before, and they're probably like this or this, but every single person I met, like, I've yet to meet somebody that I wouldn't go have lunch with or get coffee with. Like, is like kind of crazy the level of like openness, community, and I guess by virtue of being here, a lot of these people have been like pretty awesome people in their lives, right? Yes. So that I've never been in a setting that you meet people and you're like, oh, I instantly want to be your friend. I
can imagine.
Yeah,
that's great. I totally can relate to that experience. I know the pressure to choose a career afterwards is almost daunting. Yeah, on all of us. Have you thought about that? What do you want to do afterwards?
Dude, it's 2.5 months in. I'm supposed to have 2 years to figure this out.
Exactly.
I think,
and you don't have to have an answer, but
I mean, I don't really have a full concentrated answer on what it will be. I have some hypotheses that I'm very happy to be here to be testing. And that was one of the reasons I chose this school, because you can test a lot of things at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I'm really interested in like, how do you take, a lot of the stuff that I did in my old job, right?
Yeah.
Of like, how do you take a very interesting idea or a very unique idea and evaluate it? And it's sort of like a crazy idea, and evaluate it to see if it could actually work in the real world.
Yes.
And that is virtually the job of like most venture capitalists.
Yes.
In a way, but I'm very interested in like that, plus the cross section of public-private like partnerships, as the government depends more and more on like the private world.
Yes.
And yeah, so I'm like getting to meet the coolest people that have done a lot of these things. So I feel like I'm in a good spot. Yeah.
That is fantastic. Muneeb, I know that in your job with the philanthropy, you had the leader of that philanthropy was a very influential person. Yeah. Could have been very influential in your personal life as well.
Yeah.
what was the learning you took from him? Like, I'm
Yeah.
assuming he was an inspiring figure
Yeah.
growing up.
Yeah. So his name's George Kaiser. He's, I don't know. I think in many times in my life, I grew up in communities where I didn't have a lot, and their communities didn't have a lot. So you grow up sort of, the world doesn't really care about you in many ways. Like the neighborhood I was born in, Pakistan, overlooked. Scottsboro, Alabama, overlooked. Tulsa, Oklahoma, overlooked. And you begin to feel, I think, this imposter syndrome of like, there are people that do things, and then there are people that live the consequences of those things. And for a lot of us, I think that are from those backgrounds, we a hierarchy forms. This is something that somebody from here can do. This is, this is how they should be. This is how they are. This is, and I'd seen, I think, peripherally in my own life that people that were a bit more better off in a way acted certain ways. They had sort of like, they were a bit snobbish. They were a bit more like, like, oh, look at me, and here was George, who I met, like very early on, and he had no ego. He had no, like, he was very miserly about, like, sort of like.
Well, for the people who don't know, sorry to cut you off, but like, could you give me a tiny bit of his profile? Like, what was he about? I'm assuming a high net worth individual.
So George, I mean, there's like a Forbes list that basically ranks like how rich people are. I think he was probably in the top 100 in the United States, at least. He's donated a considerable amount of money to the George Kaiser Family Foundation, which is about worth like $4.5 billion. Really made his money on oil and gas, banking, considerable assets. I mean, one of the wealthiest individuals.
And yet he was
and
very cool, calm, casual.
Calm. And I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned from him was like, good ideas come from everywhere and everyone. And we should take the time and the energy to listen. And I think every interaction I've ever had with him, he approached it with curiosity. Every conversation that we ever had with like another person, or like when we were in the community, it would never come from this like top down sort of way, but always a collaborative, like, well, what do you think about this? This is what's on my mind.
Eye level,
and very like, let us solve this issue.
Yes.
Like nothing matters more than solving this issue. And I think when you pour into people like that, it teaches like someone like me who's very impressionable at a very young age, like ego is really the enemy in all of this. Like why show off? Why act like something you're not? When in reality, the only thing that we need to be struggling against is like the problem.
Yes,
right.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Muneeb, I know you're Pakistani American.
Yeah.
And Islam is also a part of your identity growing up.
Yeah.
Being from a small town, being in a minority in that small town, like is even, I think, a lot more exaggerated than being like a Pakistani American in New York City, because there it's a melting pot of different people, and then you blend in very easily. Yeah. But where you came from, you would stand out. Yeah. There might be people who watch this who have kids, or they themselves are from some sort of a minority.
Yeah.
Any advice you have for them? Like how to navigate that environment of like the cultural environment and the political environment, and then to be able to be successful?
Yeah, I think, well, that's a big question. And I don't know if I have like an answer that I sit with like day to day that stays, stable. I will say I never thought of myself as lesser. I think a lot of the times the world would push me to think that way. And out of fears of safety, I think my parents would always push us to like not participate as much as anybody else. But in many ways, that uniqueness is the superpower, right? Like when I was in high school, I started a cricket team in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Like that's not something people would do, but I was like, no, like this is something that's unique to me, and it would help other immigrant kids that were in my school that were being bullied. So we created this cricket team, and by the time we got done, we had taught over 90 kids how to play. We convinced another school to start their own team. We had hosted a state championship. Hundreds of people came to watch us play. News media covered it, and that would have never happened if there wasn't a kid from Pakistan that had shown up in this city, right? And so I think it's a very interesting lens that I think applies to business, right? Is like usually the most unique ideas, the most interesting, the most out of place, have the potential for disruption. So if you're living in an environment where you are the odd one out, you might be in the most opportune place. And I know it's difficult, but that's why it's so valuable.
I keep telling people that the MBA application has been one of the hardest things I've done in the past 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that it was very difficult for me was because I had to reflect on my past, understand what I have done in the past 10 to 12 years, what I will do during my MBA, and what that would lead into going into the future. Yeah. And I needed to kind of, for me at least, I needed to find some sort of a common denominator, a guiding principle, a North Star, if you will, that has shaped my decisions. Not to look chaotic, because it's so easy just to go through life incidentally and then doing this and that and this and that, and then just jump from one branch to the next and not have a common thread going through your life. And then for me to find that common thread was one of the major challenges. And that's what I tried to do. And that's what I tried to bring in my essays, specifically the very famous essay that Stanford has, What Matters Most to You and Why. And I wanted to find that, and that thing that matters most to me was that guiding principle that I managed to figure out and carve out for myself. When I look at your story throughout school, university, then your work with this philanthropy, and then here, I see a lot of taking the initiative. I know that you shared your article with me, what you submitted to Stanford. It's obviously, I really appreciate the trust you put in me to share that piece, which is very personal for you. I know you talked about hope in your article, and that's for sure your truth. But when I look at you as an outsider, I see a lot of initiative, and not only just taking the initiative, but also then persevering in it and then taking it forward. And that is very impressive for me. And I really congratulate you for being able to do that. Maybe as one of the last questions, you were born in Karachi, Will you ever go back to Karachi? I know you're a man of community. I know you're a man of uplifting communities and giving back to them. That's probably one of the communities that could use you the most. Not to put you on the spot. No. But have you ever thought about that?
I think about that almost every day. I think by virtue of being here in in the United States, in the way that I was in the way I was raised, every night that I would go home, I essentially went home to Pakistan. My parents only spoke Urdu at home. We only watched Pakistani news at home. The only thing that was on my mind was Pakistan my entire childhood. And I think what I'm hoping to build here, what I'm hoping that my experiences at work have built also, is concrete ways to improve lives around the world. And Pakistan is dealing with a lot of issues that I've now grown some expertise in. Very little expertise, but to have the ability to think about talent migration, to have the ability to think about community development, to have the ability to think about how do you go to a place that had been decimated and think about tangibly growing the wealth of the individuals that are now suffering the consequences of it.
Yes.
That door's never closed. That door's wide open.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about or say that you didn't get a chance to do? I always want to give that chance back to the person.
I mean, the worst thing that can ever happen in your life is that somebody says no. I mean, if you're thinking through, what if I do this? What if I do that? What if I apply for this thing? What if I ask this person this thing? What if I try to pursue this thing? The thing that I would tell anybody that's watching is sort of the problem is much worse in your head. The worst thing that can happen is someone says no. So shoot your shot.
Give it a try.
Yeah, give it a try. Because I can't imagine where I would be if it wasn't for the dozens of cold emails that have essentially led to this point in my life, or the dozens of, hey, I want to start a cricket team. Somebody said yes. Hey, I want to do this study on labor mobility. Somebody said yes. I was hey, I want to work on this park with you. Somebody said yes. And those opportunities, they sort of snowball. And all of a sudden, instead of going to dental school, you're sitting at Stanford GSB. So, you never know.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Muneeb Ata, you're the Odysseus of your story. You started in Karachi.
Yeah.
You went to Alabama. You went to Tulsa.
Yeah.
And now you're here at Stanford with me. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. I learned a lot from you, and I hope the audience has learned this.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Salih.